How are you today? Art Gottlieb, and I would like to do a 15-minute video with you on the topic that many people have been asking me about, which is depression. And we'll do a video today called Understanding Depression. As you know, all my videos are easy to understand, I hope. I don't like to use psychobabble or unnecessary terminology. Depression is a very, very common malady for so many people. The highly prescribed medications for uh, depression are legion. What is it, depression? Is it something that we need to get rid of? Is it something that is serving some kind of an adaptive function in our minds? Our society tells us that we shouldn't be depressed, so there's a certain stigma about it. You see television commercials, and if you feel like you shouldn't have to feel sad or depressed, well, that's another thing to be talked about. There are many things in life that are actually legitimately sad or legitimately depressing. Our terminology, what one person might call sad, another person might call depressed. I'm a little depressed about that. Is it something that has occurred to us or something that's going on in our lives situationally that is normal? And it's legitimate to be sad or depressed about it. That's called legitimate suffering. Or are we staying in bed till 12 noon with the sheets pulled over our heads? Well, that's something else entirely. Now, that is when we get into clinical aspects of depression, and which require diagnosis and treatment. The differentiation between something that we're just coping with in our normal lives and a clinical diagnosis is when things are so severe that they're keeping us from actually living our lives. Right? If a person is depressed and, as I just mentioned, they can't get out of bed, well, obviously that's going to affect their lives. If they're so depressed that they're preoccupied with their depression, that's something that's going to affect their lives. And that's when treatment needs to be sought. If what a person is depressed about are in the normal realm of living, a loss, something that's happened. I mean, right now, as I record this, we're still in the lockdown of coronavirus, and heaven knows that's something that's caused a multi-level depression and certainly anxiety in most people, and from some number of standpoints. So if a person is depressed because they've lost their livelihood, I mean, I wouldn't call that a clinical depression. I would call that a pretty appropriate response to a pretty sad situation. If a person is on a clinical level depression, what is it that would now be the next step? You can have medication that could actually solve some of the nastier aspects of being so depressed. And a clinician would, on the other hand, be a person who would do talk therapy like me. I'm a psychotherapist in my private practice. Now, oftentimes both are necessary, a psychiatrist to prescribe medicine and also a clinical psychologist or a clinical social worker such as myself. What is it that is depressing a person? Well, maybe a person can figure that out for themselves, but they just don't know how to deal with it. Or oftentimes, even feelings of sadness or depression are things that have occurred, that have their genesis in things that have occurred many years ago and have been forgotten about, or a person said that, well, that doesn't really matter, that doesn't bother me. And in fact, the matter is that actually kind of does bother you. and is emerging in the present tense in the form of a depression, where you need somebody like a clinician to come in and talk about it and make a diagnosis that, well, here's something in the past that has now been triggered in the present. Maybe you didn't think that it had bothered you or that it was a solved issue. It actually isn't, right? That's the point of a somebody who does talk therapy, insight therapy, such as myself. On the other hand, a psychiatrist is somebody who prescribes medication. Now, the thing is with depression is that we consider it something that is a biological factor in many cases. So you can inherit the genes that would give you the predisposition for depression. And if that's the case, this is something that you might refer to as a chemical imbalance. And therefore, certain medications might actually take the edge off of that. And you would need a psychiatrist to actually find the proper medicine for you. There are so many different medicines, and what works for one person doesn't work for the other. The notion of depression in our society is not really something that people like to talk about too much. Any kind of time that you have a psychological problem or psychiatric problem, it comes with a level of stigma, generally speaking, whereas, I don't know, if you fell down the stairs, and as embarrassing that as that would be, you broke your arm, and people would say, well, what happened to you? You know, you're in a sling now. It doesn't carry the same kind of a stigma as saying I've got a biological imbalance. You know, it's not something that people really want to throw out there. And because, well, it means that, what does that mean? Does that mean you're crazy? Does that mean that you're going to do something? Does that mean you're going to scare other people away? Does that mean you don't want to admit it yourself, so you don't even want to talk to yourself about it? Well, as far as depression is concerned, you've got a lot of company. As I said earlier, this is very, very common. And we live in a highly stressful world with many different forms of loss and anxiety that manifest into forms of depression. So, as a counselor, I will help a person reframe what's going on in their lives. I will give insight as to the origins of this, and even that sense of control that, oh, at least now I know what it is, or where it came from, or I'm not really crazy, or what I'm reacting to is actually a normal reaction. That can be very beneficial. Oftentimes, a person might need both talk therapy and a proper medication in some form. Other forms of depression, and one that has become very, very talked about, very much talked about recently, that has always existed with us, has been what we would call a manic depressive disorder, bipolar disorder, and that has, of course, as one significant element of it, depression. As far as bipolar is concerned, this indicates that on one pole you have some level of mania or hyperactive behavior, sometimes hypomanic behavior, and then on the other pole would be depression. So you would have a cycling between these two poles. Mania on the one hand, depression on the other hand. Now, the point would be here, and this is completely variable from person to person, is the severity or the amplitude of the mania and the depression. In other words, how bad they get. And the frequency. In other words, how often do they occur? If a person has a hyperactive state, if they're in some level of mania, then generally speaking, that's followed by a depressive state, right? How rapidly does that happen? How often does it happen? Right? These are the things that clinicians need to make a diagnosis about, and those are the questions that would be asked. Now, the biological aspects of these is that this is a classic case with bipolar of an inherited disorder. And many people live with this. And it may be just considered, well, this is the mood I'm in right now, so, I'm a little agitated, well, I feel a little bit sad today. And like I said to you before, we have so many things in our lives that make us normally agitated, normally sad. You might not want to just jump into well, maybe I've got manic depressive illness. That's a bit severe to jump to something like that. But that is often the case. Many times people do. There's a lot of people walking around with manic depressive illness that are undiagnosed. If you have a rapid cycling manic depressive illness, your mood might change so fast. You could have a trigger that will set you off into a level of perhaps rage, perhaps abnormally active behavior, a feeling of omnipotence from the standpoint of the manic side of it, or even the depression. It'll happen so rapidly that you won't even realize what has happened until you're already in the throes of it. You see, so for the average person, despite how insightful people can be, it's really hard to see the warning signs to this unless you're really tuned to it, which people who suffer from this have to become more aware. It's not easy to do. All of a sudden you'll be in a rage, all of a sudden you'll be depressed, all of a sudden you'll be in a mood. It's hard to catch when it's actually occurring in real time. More often you're already in it before you even make a realization of it, if so. And by that time, with this particular illness, manic depressive illness, some damage may already be done by the time it's caught. And the classic situation with a manic person, just to use a cliche example, is, you grab the mortgage money and you drive to Foxwoods at 2 o'clock in the morning, and you spend all the money on whatever, the roulette table. I'm not a gambler, I don't know. And you have this sense like there's no way that you can lose. So mania carries with it this sense of omnipotence, typically, that you're a superman or you're a superwoman. And this, of course, is a detachment from reality, which often accompanies these sorts of things. It's very, very difficult for family members to live, or spouses, loved ones, to be around somebody who's in a manic episode or somebody who's depressed, let alone chronically depressed, you see. So this is something that has all of these secondary and tertiary results when a person is suffering from a depression or mania or both.